I spoke about settings to a certain degree already, and so I spoke about several of these settings in that previous video. But I'll talk a little bit more about settings that affect performance in this video. So to start, there's some visual settings in your view settings pull down. And the main one here to be concerned with is real view graphics. And real view graphics allows us to have a little bit more of a realistic rendering in the workspace, but it also takes away CPU performance. So if you're working with very complex parts or assemblies, real view is going to slow down the performance a little bit. So if you notice, it's a little bit slow to rotate or difficult to work with, you might want to turn that setting off. The same holds for all of these other view settings. The shadows to a lesser degree. Ambient occlusion, typically you want turned off unless you're creating an image from this. And perspective as well will take a little bit more CPU. Within the options, in the document properties, another visual setting is the image quality. And this moves from very high to very low detail. And the lower we go with this, the faster an object's going to rotate in the workspace. And so if we're working with a very large assembly or quite a few parts, typically we'll want this set to low. Within the system options, new to 2012 is this freeze bar. And this allows you to freeze out features from being rebuilt. So it's going to keep these features set up as they were previously. And then this feature or subsequent features are the only ones that are going to get rebuilt. And this makes it easy to model on top of a complex part that has a long rebuild time without having to go back and wait. Within the performance tab is verification on rebuild, which I spoke about briefly. But typically you want this turned off. This checks for issues between every face within a part, whereas by default SolidWorks checks against adjacent faces. So for example, SolidWorks is right now checking when it rebuilds this face against this face and this face against the back face, as well as the ones on the other sides. Whereas if I turn on verification on rebuild, this face is going to be checked against every single one of these faces within the part. And so if you have a little bit more of a complex surfacing model, you may want to turn that on, as SolidWorks will ignore issues between non-adjacent faces. But otherwise, typically you want that turned off. Curvature generation, once again, as I stated in the other video, you typically want this as less for higher performance or off. But if you're not having any performance issues, you might want to turn this to higher, and you'll get a little bit more detail on curvature. One that I recommend turning on and like to turn on is no preview during open. And this is going to help speed up the loading process, as typically it's not really necessary to view the preview while you're opening a part.